I wasn't supposed to be there. That truth pulsed through my veins, louder than the party music echoing from inside the house. My hands trembled as I stood across the street, staring at the balloons tied to the front porch, pink, white, and gold. I remember thinking how beautiful they looked, how perfect everything seemed, just like my daughter liked it, polished, clean, painless. My heart pounded so violently that I felt it in my throat. I had rehearsed this in my head over and over, walking in, smiling gently, hugging my granddaughter, telling her how beautiful she looked. Maybe they'd be surprised at first, but then they'd remember. I'm the grandmother, her grandmother, the woman who rocked her to sleep while her mother worked late nights, the one who sewed her first baby dress, the one who whispered lullabies that crossed oceans and generations. But no one had invited me. Not a text, not a call. Not even one of those automated evites that people send to acquaintances. Nothing. I had found out from a neighbor. She saw my daughter loading the car with gifts and pastel decorations last week. She mentioned the party casually, assuming I was going, of course. "It's going to be so sweet. I heard they're doing a garden theme. You must be excited, Dolores." I had smiled then, a shaky, fake smile, and nodded. Yes, very. That night I cried in silence, but I came anyway, because sometimes love doesn't need an invitation, and sometimes pain demands to be witnessed. As I crossed the street, each step felt heavier than the last. My shoes tapped the pavement like a countdown, and my mind whispered a question I'd been trying to silence for months. Why? Why did she stop calling? Why did she pull away? Why did my own daughter, the child I sacrificed everything for, begin treating me like a stain she couldn't scrub off her perfect life? The lawn was full of people. Strangers mostly. Neighbors, co-workers, friends from the fancy school her husband insisted the girl attend. I didn't recognize them. They didn't recognize me. That made it easier for a moment, like I could blend in, just another guest. But then the whispers began. First a glance, then a pause, then a tilt of the head. "Do you know her?" I heard one woman murmur. "Is she part of the staff?" Staff. That word pierced through me like a blade. I had been called many things in my life. Poor, simple, tired, but never invisible. And now, in the middle of my granddaughter's birthday party, I was becoming exactly that. A blurry figure in the background, a shadow without a name. The children laughed nearby, oblivious, innocent, running through the garden, their dresses swaying, their little hands sticky with frosting and melted candy. And among them, there she was, my granddaughter, 5 years old, beautiful. She was wearing the yellow dress I had sewn for her a year ago. I recognized the stitching on the hem, the little embroidered sunflowers I had added with care. She still wore it. My heart cracked open at the sight. But she didn't see me. She didn't run to me like she used to. Didn't call out, "Abuelita," with that tiny burst of joy that made all the years of struggle melt away. She just looked at me, curiously, like I was someone new, someone unknown. It was the way her eyes lingered for a second too long, her brow slightly furrowed, before she turned back to her friends. That moment broke me more than a scream ever could. I walked deeper into the backyard, my steps slow, careful. I told myself to breathe, to smile, to not make a scene. And that's when I saw the cake. God, the cake. It stood tall and perfect on a glass pedestal, surrounded by cupcakes and decorative flowers, the centerpiece of the celebration. On it, written in gold letters, were the words, "To the best mother in the world." And right above it was a photo, but not of me, not the woman who raised her, not the mother who scraped floors and stitched until her fingers bled to make sure her daughter had something better. It was the nanny, a woman I had hired, trained, trusted, a woman I had paid when I could barely afford my own groceries. Her picture was on the cake, holding my daughter as a baby, smiling like the story was hers to tell. I stood frozen. The air left my lungs, and I remembered how it felt to be invisible. I remembered the cold hospital room where I gave birth alone. I remembered working double shifts while my body still ached from delivery. I remembered skipping meals to buy formula, counting quarters in the kitchen drawer. And now, I wasn't even a footnote in my daughter's life. People clapped as my daughter stepped forward to say a few words. She looked radiant, confident, a perfect hostess. She cleared her throat and smiled. Thank you all for coming today to celebrate our little sunshine. We're so blessed to have such an amazing support system, and I just want to take a moment to honor someone very special. I held my breath. Someone who helped me become the woman I am today. My chest tightened. Someone who gave me love, structure, and care when I needed it most. The crowd leaned in. And who continues to inspire me with her strength and kindness. I waited. I waited to hear my name, to hear my mother, or even just Dolores, but it never came. Thank you, Miss Linda, she said, turning toward the nanny. You are, and always will be, my real role model. And they embraced. Applause echoed like thunder. My ears rang. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just stood there, a ghost in my own story. The taste of betrayal settled like ash on my tongue. And I realized something terrifying. My daughter had rewritten our history. And in her version, I didn't exist. And yet, I stayed. I stayed because I needed to see her face one more time. Because I needed to know if even a flicker of memory remained in her eyes. If maybe, just maybe, some part of her still remembered who I was. She didn't look at me once, even when I stood barely 10 feet away, even when I whispered her name. And so I stood alone in that crowd of polished strangers, clutching my purse like it was the only thing anchoring me to reality. My fingers wrapped tightly around a small box inside it, something I had brought for my granddaughter, a hand-stitched headband with tiny daisies, made with the same hands that once braided my daughter's hair. I didn't dare take it out. I just held it, and I cried in silence. Because sometimes, grief doesn't come when someone dies. Sometimes, it comes when you realize you've been erased while still breathing. If you've ever felt like your love was ignored, like your sacrifices were buried under someone else's version of the truth, I want to hear from you. Comment right now. My love was real. Your voice matters, and your story deserves to be remembered. The applause faded slowly, but the ache in my chest did not. I stood there, feeling like my entire body was made of glass, each breath threatening to crack the surface. I couldn't hear the music anymore. I couldn't hear the laughter or the children squealing as they chased each other around the yard. All I could hear was the sound of my heartbeat, sluggish, heavy, and full of something I hadn't felt in years. Grief. Not the kind that comes from death, but the kind that comes from being replaced. I turned toward the cake again. I don't know why. Maybe some part of me needed to look at it one more time, to convince myself I wasn't imagining it. That this wasn't just a horrible misunderstanding, but the truth was as clear as the sugary gold letters piped across the top. To the best mother in the world. The words hit me like a slap. Sharp, precise, and public. And then, right above those golden letters, the photo. A framed, edible image printed on sugar paper, preserved perfectly on the cake's surface. Her smile beamed. Her arms cradled my daughter as a baby. The image they chose made it look like she had always been there, from the very beginning. Like she had been the one to hold her through fevers, to rock her to sleep through nights of colic and hunger. As if she had stayed after clocking out. As if she had loved her the way I had. But I knew better. Because I was the one who hired her. I remember the day clearly. My daughter was 6 months old, and I had just picked up a second cleaning job. I couldn't afford daycare, and my body was breaking under the weight of exhaustion. A neighbor recommended a young woman who had just moved into the area. Linda. Quiet, polite, willing to work for cheap. She had no experience, but I trained her. I taught her how to feed the baby, how to burp her gently, how to warm the milk without burning it. I trusted her with my most precious thing because I had no other choice. I used to come home after 10-hour shifts and find the baby asleep in Linda's lap. I'd smile, grateful, even though I secretly wished I could be the one holding her. But I had to work. I had to survive. I had to give my daughter a future. I never resented Linda. She did her job. And when she left after a year, we parted on good terms. She moved away, and life moved on. So imagine what it felt like to see her picture on that cake. Not just a guest of honor, but a rewritten chapter in a book that used to be mine. People started lining up to take photos with the cake. Smiling guests leaned in, posing beside it like it was a celebrity. Phones flashed, kids clapped. and I just stood there, invisible. My daughter walked over to the table, adjusted a few cupcakes, then turned to Linda and gave her another hug. A deep, intimate hug. One that felt like it carried years of love and memory. My stomach twisted. And then I saw something that gutted me entirely. Right beside the cake was a small display board. Pictures. Old pictures. A timeline of my daughter's life, from baby to teen to adult. But none of them had me in it. Not one. There were photos of birthdays, holidays, first days of school. In every image, someone else stood beside her. Linda, her father's sister, even neighbors I barely remembered. But not me. It was as if I had been surgically removed from her history. I took a step closer, hoping maybe, just maybe, I had missed one. There had to be at least one. A blurry image in the background. A hand holding a bottle. A silhouette. But no, not even that. I wanted to scream, to tear down the board, to yell, I was there, I was there. But my voice betrayed me. My throat tightened. My eyes burned. I turned away and covered my mouth to stifle the sob rising in my chest. No one noticed. Or maybe they did, and they chose to look away. Because uncomfortable truths make people uncomfortable. Because no one wants to ask questions at a party. Because the truth ruins the pretty picture. And in that moment, I realized I had been written out, not just forgotten, but erased. I reached into my purse again. My fingers found the headband I had made. Tiny white daisies embroidered on pale yellow fabric. I had stayed up until midnight the night before finishing it. My fingers ached from the stitching, but it didn't matter. I imagined the way my granddaughter's curls would look under the band. How proud she'd feel to wear something her abuelita made just for her. But now, looking at her from across the garden, I hesitated. She was being held by Linda, laughing, clapping along with the music, looking happy. Would giving her the headband make me feel better? Or would it make things worse? Would it confuse her? Would my daughter scold me later? Tell me I was overstepping? Tell me again, like she had on the phone months ago, Mom, it's not about you anymore. Stop making everything about you. I put the headband back in my purse, swallowed the lump in my throat, and tried to smile. But I couldn't, because grief doesn't wait for permission. And betrayal doesn't care if you're in public. A child ran past me, bumping into my hip. He looked up at me, startled, then quickly ran back to the other kids. His mother followed behind. She looked at me, confused. Sorry, are you with the catering staff? She asked, trying to be polite. I shook my head, voice barely audible. No, But I stopped myself, because I didn't know how to finish that sentence anymore. I used to say, I'm her mother. Proudly, firmly, but now the words tasted wrong. Because if I was really her mother, why wasn't I on the cake? Why wasn't I in the photos? Why was I alone, standing on the outskirts of a party I wasn't even invited to? The music changed. The DJ announced that they were about to sing Happy Birthday. Everyone gathered around the table. I stood behind a column near the fence, watching. My daughter picked up the cake knife and smiled wide for the camera. And as everyone sang, clapped, and cheered, I felt like I was watching someone else's life. Like I was outside of a glass wall, pressing my hand against it, screaming, but no one could hear. Or maybe they heard and just didn't care. Because when you no longer serve a purpose in someone's narrative, they rewrite you. If you've ever felt like your love was erased, like someone rewrote your role in their life without your consent, please leave a comment below. I was part of the story. Say it loud. Say it proud. Let them know you were there. Because the world needs to remember the love they choose to forget. I left the party without saying a word. I didn't even know how my legs moved. It felt like my body was on autopilot, like some part of me detached itself from the pain, from the humiliation, just to get me through the gate and back onto the street. The sun had started to set. The sky was painted in soft oranges and purples, that kind of light that usually made me pause, take a deep breath, and whisper a quiet thank you to God. But not that day. That day, I didn't even look up. I walked home in silence, gripping the strap of my purse like it was the only thing keeping me from collapsing right there on the sidewalk. I passed neighbors watering their lawns, children riding bikes, couples walking dogs. Life was happening all around me, so normal, so mundane. And yet, Something inside me had shifted in a way that felt permanent, because now I knew I wasn't a mother in her eyes. Not anymore. Maybe I hadn't been for a long time. When I finally stepped into my house, the quiet hit me like a wave, that kind of heavy silence that settles into your bones. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't kick off my shoes. I didn't even close the door behind me right away. I just stood there in the middle of my living room, this small, humble space I had kept clean and warm for so many years, and I cried. Not the kind of crying that makes sound, but the kind that feels like it's tearing you apart from the inside. My name is Dolores Martinez. I'm 67 years old. I live in El Paso, Texas, in a little yellow house with chipping paint and a porch swing that creaks when the wind blows just right. I was born in Michoacan, Mexico, and I came to the United States when I was just 21 years old. I didn't come with much, just a suitcase, a handful of prayers, and a baby in my belly. That baby was my daughter. I've lived in this country for over 4 decades. I've worked hard every single day. I started off cleaning houses, then sewing for a dry cleaner, then taking in custom mending jobs from the neighborhood. I never got rich. I never asked to. I just wanted enough to survive, and to give my daughter a life that didn't feel like surviving. This little house, it may not look like much, but it's been my sanctuary. Every photo on the wall, every mug in the kitchen, every pillow on the couch, it all tells a story. My story. Our story. But apparently, it's not her story anymore. I sat on the couch, finally letting the weight of the day settle onto my chest like a stone. My hands rested on my lap, wrinkled, spotted, a little swollen from years of sewing and scrubbing. These hands, they fed her, bathed her, braided her hair every morning before school. They packed her lunches and mended her torn uniforms. They worked double shifts just to buy her that prom dress she wanted so badly. These hands have held so much love, so much sacrifice, and yet not a single picture of me was on that display board. I got up and went to my bedroom, opened the drawer of my nightstand. Inside, there were letters she wrote me as a child, tiny, misspelled love notes on construction paper. I love you, Mommy. You're the best cooker ever. When I grow up, I want to be like you. I used to reread them whenever I missed her. Now, they just felt like lies. On the dresser sat an old picture frame, cracked on one corner, holding a photo of me holding her as a baby. She was wrapped in a blanket I had sewn from scraps, her tiny eyes looking up at me like I was her entire world. I remember that day. We had no money for a studio photo, so a neighbor with a decent camera took it for us. I was exhausted, wearing a borrowed dress, but I had never felt more proud in my life. I picked up the frame, pressed it to my chest, and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. How did we get here? When did the shift happen? Was it when she started high school and began hanging around wealthier kids? When she got into college and moved away? Was it when she met that man, so clean-cut, so polished, who always looked at me like I was something under his shoe? I tried so hard to keep my place in her life. I never judged. I never told her how to live, even when she started correcting my English in front of her friends. Even when she laughed a little too hard at the way I pronounced vegetables or laundry, I just smiled and said, "Yes, mija, you're right." I thought I was being humble. I thought I was being a good mother. But maybe I was just letting her slowly erase me, piece by piece. Because now, standing in my bedroom, I couldn't find a single part of her life that I was still allowed to touch. Not the school she chose for my granddaughter. Not the bedtime stories. Not the family traditions. She had created her own narrative, and in it, I was just the poor immigrant woman who raised her, but never quite fit the image she wanted to project, a woman to hide, to forget, to exclude. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at my sewing machine in the corner of the room. It was old, but reliable. I've had it for over 20 years. I made everything with it: clothes, curtains, costumes, even the dress she wore to her college graduation. She had called me the night before the ceremony. "Mommy," she said, "can you make something elegant but not too flashy?" I had stayed up all night stitching, making sure the hem was perfect, the fabric smooth, the buttons just right, and she wore it, smiling in pictures. Pictures that, I now realize, I was never sent. I wiped my face and stood up. I walked to the closet, pulled out a box labeled Emma, my granddaughter's name. Inside were all the little things I'd made for her. Headbands, dresses, tiny mittens. A baby quilt with her name embroidered in soft pink thread. I touched each item like it was sacred, because for me, they are. Each stitch is a memory. Each piece is proof that I was here, that I loved her, that I mattered. But none of these things were at the party. No one talked about the quilt. No one remembered the first time she called me abuela. No one mentioned the days I stayed with her while her mother was at work, feeding her, singing to her, rocking her to sleep while I hummed the same lullaby my mother once sang to me. All of it, erased. I reached into the box and pulled out a small, crocheted bear. The yarn was fraying at the edges. Emma used to carry it everywhere. I remember her little fingers gripping it so tightly while she watched cartoons on my lap. She called it Boo Boo. She once cried for hours when she thought she lost it. I wondered if she even remembered it now. Or me. Have you ever felt like someone rewrote your role in their life? Like they edited you out of the story completely? If that pain lives in your chest the way it does in mine, please share your voice. Type in the comments, I remember everything they forgot, because your memory matters. Your love was real. And silence doesn't mean your story didn't exist. I didn't have anyone when she was born. No husband, no mother, no sister to hold my hand. Just me, alone in a hospital room that smelled like bleach and loneliness, wearing a paper gown and holding my swollen belly while the nurses moved around like I didn't exist. I was 21, scared, exhausted, and yet, when I heard that first cry, when I looked down and saw her tiny face, I felt something shift inside of me. I wasn't scared anymore, because I had a purpose now, a reason to keep going. She was so small, so perfect. I named her Clara, after my grandmother, a woman who had raised me with nothing but her bare hands and her prayers. And from that moment on, Clara became my reason to breathe. We had nothing. No nursery, no fancy crib, just a second-hand bassinet that a neighbor donated. But I painted it myself, added ribbons on the sides, made it feel like love lived there. I stitched blankets from scraps of old fabric, floral sheets, faded shirts, curtains I couldn't afford to replace. Every piece of fabric had a story. Every thread was a promise. I promised I would never let her feel the kind of emptiness I had grown up with. Her father? He disappeared the moment I told him I was pregnant. Said he wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility. I never heard from him again. Not a card, not a phone call, nothing. So I became both mother and father, nurturer and protector, teacher and provider. And I did it with pride. During the day, I cleaned houses. Rich people's homes. Homes with spiral staircases, marble countertops, kitchens bigger than my entire apartment. I scrubbed floors while Clara stayed at home with a neighbor I paid in meals because I couldn't afford babysitting. At night, I took in sewing work. Hemming pants, fixing zippers, patching holes in clothes people had thrown into bags like they were garbage. That's how I bought her first shoes. Little pink ones with tiny hearts on the side. I cried when she took her first steps in them. Everything I ever gave her, I gave through sacrifice. I went without new shoes so she could have a jacket. I skipped dinners so she could go on field trips. I said yes to every overtime shift so she wouldn't feel like the girl who had less. And she never did. People used to tell me how lucky I was, how polite and bright Clara was. They'd compliment her grades, her manners, her sweet smile. I would nod, smile, and say thank you. But inside I was bursting with pride, because I knew the price I paid for that smile. I remember her birthday parties when she was little. Not like the one I just saw with hired entertainers and custom cakes. No, ours were simple. A few friends from school. Homemade decorations cut from construction paper. A cake I baked the night before. Always vanilla with strawberry filling, her favorite. We couldn't afford gifts, so I made them. Dolls from cloth. Dresses from leftover fabric. One year, I made her a stuffed unicorn. She slept with it every night for 3 years, and every night I'd sit at the edge of her bed, stroke her hair, and whisper, "You are loved, Mija. So, so loved." Even when my body ached, even when I wanted to scream from exhaustion, even when I had nothing left to give, I gave more, because that's what mothers do. One winter, Clara got sick, really sick. Fever, chills, vomiting. I didn't have health insurance, and the clinic refused to see us without full payment. So I wrapped her in 3 blankets, held her against my chest all night, and sang softly until the fever broke. I remember praying over her body, tears soaking her forehead, whispering to God, "Take my health, my strength, my life, but not her, never her." I used to think that kind of love would be unshakable, that a child could never forget the woman who held them through the darkest nights. But I've learned something cruel. People forget. They forget the meals made from nothing but love and leftovers. They forget the nights you stayed awake so they could sleep. They forget the years of sacrifice. They rewrite you. And if you don't fit the image they want for their new life, they erase you completely. I started noticing the shift when Clara was in high school. She'd come home talking about her friends' houses, how clean they were, how fancy, how their moms didn't smell like bleach or wear uniforms. She began calling me Ma instead of Mommy. A small change, but I felt it like a crack in a foundation. She didn't want me picking her up from school anymore. She said she'd walk, but I knew the truth. She didn't want her friends to see my old car or my tired clothes. One day she asked if I could try to speak more proper English when her friends were around. I smiled and nodded, because I didn't want to embarrass her. But that was the first time I felt the distance, and it only grew. When she got her college acceptance letter, I cried. Not just because I was proud, but because I knew it meant I was losing her. She got a scholarship, the first in our family. I helped her pack, sewed her new sheets, and left little notes in her suitcase with messages like, "Don't forget where you came from," and "I'll always be here if you need me." She didn't call for 2 weeks after she moved. When I finally heard her voice, it was short, rushed. "Sorry, Ma, I've been busy. College is a lot." I understood. I always understood. Even when it hurt. Even when the letters stopped. Even when my birthday passed without a call. Even when holidays turned into excuses and maybe next year. I always forgave. Because I remembered. I remembered every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every school project I stayed up all night helping with. I remembered her first heartbreak, how she cried into my lap, and I whispered that time would heal. I remembered dancing with her in the kitchen, making tortillas while Selena played on the radio. I remembered everything, and I thought that was enough. But memory is a heavy thing to carry alone, especially when the other person pretends it never happened. If you're still with me right now, if this story is echoing inside you, I want to hear from you. Please take a second and write in the comments, "My love built everything," because it did, and no one, not even your own child, can erase the truth of what you've given. I think it's hard to pinpoint the exact moment when a daughter stops seeing her mother as a hero and starts seeing her as an embarrassment. But with Clara, I felt it in pieces. Little moments, small glances, the way her voice changed when she spoke to me around others. Like I needed to shrink, to soften myself so she could shine brighter. She started introducing me as Dolores instead of my mom when her college friends came around. It seemed harmless at first. Maybe she thought it sounded more respectful, more grown up, but it chipped away at something in me, like she was pulling the title away, syllable by syllable, until I was just a name, a character, not her mother, just someone who existed on the edges of her story. And then came Michael, the man she met during her final year of college. Tall, clean-shaven, always dressed like he was headed to a business meeting. His smile was polished, but his eyes, they never softened around me. From the very beginning, he looked at me like I was inconvenient. Not cruel, just distant, calculated. At our first meeting, I made tamales and arroz con pollo. I set the table with the best I had. I wore my nicest blouse and even curled my hair. I wanted to make a good impression, but Michael barely touched his food. He asked Clara in front of me if they could go out for something lighter instead, something healthier. She laughed awkwardly and said nothing. I cleaned up in silence after they left. It was the first of many times he made me feel small, like the life I had built, my language, my culture, my sacrifices, were just outdated remnants of something to be quietly pushed aside. Clara never defended me. She always said, "He's just particular," or "He's used to things being a certain way." And slowly, she became used to things being his way too. They got married the following year. A small ceremony, Not because they wanted it intimate, but because, as Clara explained to me, Michael doesn't like big family gatherings. They're too messy. Messy. That word clung to me. It was how she saw me now, unpolished, unrefined, a leftover from a life she didn't want anyone to know she came from. I remember offering to make her wedding dress. I even started sketching it, pulling fabrics from storage, thinking maybe she'd want that kind of connection. But she said she already had a designer in mind. He understands the aesthetic I'm going for, she told me. Clean, minimal, elegant. As if my hands, my stitches, weren't clean enough. I didn't go to the final fitting. I said I had work. The truth was, I didn't want to stand there and watch another woman take my place in a role that was supposed to be mine. Not out of jealousy, but because I knew, deep down, that Clara wasn't just building a new life. She was building a new version of herself. And in that version, there was no room for a mother who spoke with an accent, who wore shoes until they wore through, who had the hands of a working woman and the soul of someone who never rested. They moved into a beautiful house not long after. Clean lines, white walls, furniture I didn't dare sit on. I visited once. Just once. I brought empanadas, still warm from the oven. Michael opened the door, and the look on his face said everything. He took the tray with 2 fingers, thanked me curtly, and said Clara was on a work call. I waited in the kitchen for 45 minutes. When she finally came out, she barely made eye contact. She looked tired, distracted, like I had interrupted something important. We spoke for 15 minutes, mostly about the weather, and then she hugged me goodbye with one arm. I walked home that day, holding the empty tray like it was a shield, and I stopped visiting. Instead, I waited for her to call. But she didn't. Not when I got pneumonia that winter. Not when I had to sell my car to pay for dental work. Not even on my birthday. She called 2 weeks later, said, "Sorry, work's been crazy. You know how it is." No, Clara. I don't know how it is. I know what it's like to scrub hotel bathrooms until your knees go numb. I know what it's like to hand-stitch a dress all night because the rent is due and the landlord won't wait. I know what it's like to stretch beans and rice for 4 days because there's nothing else in the cupboard. But I don't know what it's like to forget the woman who gave up everything for you. I wanted to scream those words into the phone, but instead I said, "It's okay, Mija. I understand." Because that's what I always did. I made excuses for her. I softened her cruelty in my mind. I told myself she was busy, tired, overwhelmed. But the truth was harder to swallow. The truth was, she was ashamed of me. She started talking about her past differently when she spoke at events or posted online. She painted her childhood as humble, sure, but never with details, never with names. She talked about overcoming adversity, but left out the mother who carried her through it. She credited her success to resilience and mentorship. Never to love, never to sacrifice. And once, in a podcast she shared on social media, I heard her say something that made my knees buckle. "I was lucky," she said. "My nanny basically raised me. She was my real maternal figure growing up." My hands went cold. I listened to it 3 times. Each time the words hurt more. My nanny, my real maternal figure. She wasn't talking about me. She was talking about Linda, the woman who worked for us for barely a year, the woman I trained, paid, fed, the woman I trusted, yes, but who never stayed long enough to know the lullabies or the way Clara's nose crinkled when she was scared. But now, in the new version of Clara's story, Linda was the mother, and I was no one. Not even a footnote, just a shadow behind a closed curtain. And it made me question everything. Had I done something wrong? Had I loved too much? Or not enough? Was I too loud? Too soft? Too present? But I know the answer. I was just inconvenient. Unfit for the image Clara wanted to project. She was building a new life, a new identity, and I didn't fit in the blueprint. If you've ever felt like you were slowly erased from someone's story, if you were once their everything, and now you're treated like nothing, I want you to share your voice. Please leave a comment. They erased me, but I was there. Let's remind each other that our love, our presence, our pain, it all mattered, even if they pretend it didn't. After the podcast, I didn't speak to Clara for almost 3 months. Not because I was punishing her, not because I wanted her to feel what I felt, but because I didn't know how to speak through that kind of heartbreak. It wasn't just pain. It was a rupture, like someone had taken the version of me that lived in her memories, torn it up, and built a new woman in my place. One who was neater, simpler, easier to admire. One who didn't carry the marks of struggle on her face. One who had no accent, no cracked hands, no history stitched together by survival. In this new narrative Clara created, I didn't belong. And still, every day, I waited by the phone. I left it charging by my bed, volume turned all the way up, just in case. I told myself, maybe she'll call. Maybe she'll say she's sorry. Maybe she'll realize that a mother doesn't have to be perfect to be irreplaceable. But the phone stayed silent. The days blurred together. I'd wake up, make coffee, stare out the window. I used to keep busy sewing, crocheting, reading the paper. But during those weeks, even small tasks felt heavy. My hands would pick up a needle, but my heart wasn't in it. Everything reminded me of her. Every fabric I touched, every dish I cooked, every child I saw in the neighborhood. Sometimes I'd go to the store just to feel people around me, just to hear a voice, even if it wasn't speaking to me. Loneliness doesn't always scream. It often whispers. It creeps into the corners of your house, hides between the folds of clean laundry, settles in the silence between your thoughts. And my silence was filled with one thought. How did she forget me? I thought about visiting, showing up at her doorstep with no warning, the way I used to when Emma was born, just to help, just to be near. But now that house didn't feel like mine to enter. It felt like a stranger's space. White walls, cold furniture, the smell of lavender cleaner instead of arroz and tortillas. That house had no place for the woman who raised her. But what broke me, what truly shattered me, was what happened with Emma. One day, out of nowhere, I got a text. Not from Clara, from a number I didn't recognize. It was a photo. Emma, smiling, holding a drawing. A stick figure family. A tall man, a woman with blonde hair, and a child in the middle. At the top, written in colorful crayon, were the words, "My family, mommy, daddy, and me." There was no abuela, no grandmother, no space in that paper house for the woman who had once rocked her to sleep while her mother chased degrees and deadlines. I stared at that photo for hours. I must have zoomed in a dozen times, looking for some sign that maybe Emma had remembered me on her own. Maybe I was hidden somewhere, on a corner, in a flower, in the colors. But no, I wasn't there. And the text? It wasn't meant for me. It was sent by mistake, likely intended for someone else. There was no follow-up, no explanation, no apology. And that was when I finally realized the truth that had been trying to make itself heard through all the little betrayals. I had been erased from 2 generations. Clara hadn't just removed me from her own story. She was making sure her daughter never even knew me. I thought back to Emma's first birthday, how I'd held her while Clara cut the cake, how I'd helped bathe her, wrap her in a towel, dry her little curls. She had fallen asleep on my chest that night, and I stayed in the rocking chair for hours, not wanting to move, not wanting to break the moment. It was the last time I held her like that. After that, the visits got shorter, the calls less frequent, the rules more rigid. She's got a schedule now. She doesn't nap well after being at your house. Michael thinks it's confusing for her. Confusing. The word echoed in my mind like a curse. They said it like my presence would somehow disrupt the structure of Emma's life, like my love was something dangerous. How could they think that? I had never hurt her, never overstepped, never even raised my voice. All I ever gave was softness. All I ever wanted was to be the arms she could run to when the world felt too big. But instead, they closed the door quietly, little by little, until I was left standing on the other side. And the worst part? They did it so gently, so slowly, that for a while I didn't even realize it was happening. That's the cruelty of being replaced. It doesn't always happen in one sudden betrayal. Sometimes it happens through silence, through forgotten invitations, through missed calls, through birthdays that pass with no card, through stories rewritten so many times that the truth becomes unrecognizable. I didn't stop being a mother. They just stopped acknowledging that I ever was one. And yet, every part of this life I built, every decision, every sacrifice, was made for her. When I skipped doctor appointments because I couldn't miss work. When I borrowed money from neighbors to buy her books. When I cleaned other people's homes so hers could be warm and safe. When I buried my own dreams so she could chase hers. I never asked for repayment, only respect, only presence, only a phone call now and then, maybe a visit on Christmas, a thank you whispered between busy days. Instead, I became a ghost. And yet, despite it all, I still dreamed. I still dreamed of hearing Emma say, "Abuela," again, of having her over for a weekend, letting her help me bake cookies, letting her touch the same flour-stained counter her mother once leaned on as a little girl. I dreamed of being remembered, of being forgiven, if forgiveness was ever needed. Because deep down, I believed, no, I knew, that love like mine doesn't disappear, even when it's pushed away, even when it's ignored, even when it's not on the cake, or in the photos, or in the stories they tell. It's in the walls of this house, in the stitches of every dress I made, in the soft lullabies that still float through my memory like ghosts of comfort. If this part of my story is echoing in your heart, if you too feel like your love was quietly erased, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment right now with the words, "I was always there, even when they forgot." You're not alone. You never were. And your story deserves to be told. That night, after staring at the drawing Emma had made for what felt like hours, I placed my phone face down on the table and sat in silence. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't hurt, but because there comes a point where even tears feel hollow. When grief has carved so deep into your chest that you can't find anything left to release. It was strange. All my life, I'd feared being forgotten, but I never thought I would be forgotten while I was still alive. Do you know that kind of pain? To still be breathing, but to feel like your place in the world was quietly packed away, stored in someone's attic, like an old photograph that no one looks at anymore. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying everything over and over. Every birthday party, every scraped knee, every whispered "I love you" at bedtime. I could almost hear Clara's voice at 6 years old, giggling in her sleep after I told her a silly story. Back then, she used to call me her angel, her protector, her best friend. Now I was none of those things. And yet, my love for her hadn't changed, not one bit, even after everything, even after she erased me from the story. And that's the most brutal truth I've had to live with. Love doesn't always fade with time or neglect. Sometimes it stays, even when it shouldn't, even when it hurts, even when the person you love no longer sees you as part of their life. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I took out my photo albums, not the ones I had posted on social media or tucked neatly away for guests to see, the real ones. The ones held together by tape and memories. The ones stained with old coffee marks and wrinkled from fingers flipping through them too many times. And I started looking, page by page, memory by memory. There she was, Clara, barely 2 years old, covered in chocolate frosting, her eyes shining as she reached for my face with sticky fingers. There she was at her kindergarten graduation, in a dress I made from a curtain I found at Goodwill, grinning with 2 missing front teeth. There she was in middle school, holding up a spelling bee trophy, her arm wrapped tightly around my neck. And there I was, in every photo. Not a perfect mother, but a present one. There were no nannies in these pictures. No polished homes or curated stories. Just us. Just a woman doing her best, and a little girl who used to look at her like the sun rose from her smile. I traced my fingers over those old photographs, letting the textures pull me back in time. Letting the truth ground me, remind me, I was there. I am part of her story, no matter how much she tries to revise the script. And I suddenly realized, no one can take that away from me. They can ignore me. They can replace me in birthday toasts and Instagram captions. They can build photo walls and podcasts that speak only of others. But they cannot undo the years that shaped her. They cannot unlive the moments we lived together. They cannot unlove the love that I gave, even if they pretend it never happened. That morning, I did something else I hadn't done in a long time. I wrote a letter. Not a dramatic one. Not angry. Just honest. I folded a piece of paper in half, sat at my kitchen table, and let the words flow. "Dear Clara," I wrote, I saw the cake, I saw the photo, I saw the board, and I saw myself missing from all of it. My hand trembled as I kept writing, but I didn't stop. I want you to know that I am not angry. I am heartbroken, because I loved you before anyone else ever knew your name. I held you before anyone else ever knew what your heartbeat sounded like. I stayed up all night sewing, so you'd have something beautiful to wear when we had nothing. I worked through pain and hunger and exhaustion because I believed in you, because I wanted you to feel safe, to feel worthy, to feel loved. You may not remember those things. You may have chosen to remember someone else, and that's your right. But I need to say this. For me, I was there. I was your mother, and I still am. I didn't send the letter. I folded it and placed it in the back of my photo album, behind a picture of Clara wearing a pink sweater I'd knit the night before her first day of school. It wasn't meant to change anything. It was just a reminder to myself that my version of the story matters too, that my voice, even if no longer heard, still exists. That night, I looked around my little house, the cracks in the walls, the worn-out cushions, the smell of lavender oil mixed with something old and familiar. This place may not be elegant. It may not be Instagram-worthy, but it held a lifetime of truth. It held love, layered in every fabric and thread. It held sacrifice, poured into every recipe and every hug. It held me, and that matters. I got up, walked to my sewing machine, and turned it on. The hum filled the room like an old friend's whisper. I took a piece of fabric I'd been saving, soft, floral, faded from age, and began stitching. I didn't know what I was making yet. Maybe a dress, maybe a blanket, maybe just something to keep my hands busy while my heart remembered who I was. Because that's the thing about mothers like me. We don't stop. We keep loving, even when it hurts. We keep showing up, even when we're no longer invited. We keep remembering, even when the world forgets us. And if you're someone who knows what it feels like to love in silence, to give without recognition, to be the root of a tree that now grows without looking down, please share your truth. Type in the comments, "My roots still hold the tree." Your story matters, your pain is real, and your presence, whether they acknowledge it or not, shaped everything. The fabric slid through my fingers like memory, soft, worn, familiar. It was the kind I used to save, small cuts from larger rolls, extras from orders I'd done years ago. I kept them all, neatly folded, believing that one day I'd use them to make something special for Clara's child, something handmade, something full of meaning. That was always my way. I didn't buy love. I sewed it, stitched it, tucked it into every seam. That morning, with the sound of the sewing machine purring low in the background, I found myself holding one of those saved pieces, a square of sky blue cotton with tiny yellow flowers, and my heart whispered her name, Emma. I hadn't seen her in months. Not really. Not in the way a grandmother should. I had passed her once at the supermarket. She was with her father, Michael, walking down the cereal aisle, clutching his hand, laughing at something he said. I stood at the other end of the aisle, behind a shelf of canned goods, frozen. My heart pounded in my ears. I didn't call out. I didn't wave, because I didn't know if she'd even recognize me. Or worse, what if she looked right at me and didn't see me at all? I had become a stranger to her, a shadow on the outskirts of her carefully managed life. I held that fabric in my hand and began to sew, not because I thought it would change anything, but because it grounded me. The rhythm of the needle, the hum of the motor, the tug of thread between my fingers. It reminded me that I still had something to offer, even if no one wanted it anymore. And slowly, I began to make something. A small dress, the kind a little girl might wear on a Sunday morning to church. Simple, soft, with a little sash around the waist. I added yellow piping along the hem. I embroidered a single flower on the chest, careful with every stitch. It wasn't fancy, but it was real. And as I worked, I imagined Emma wearing it, twirling in the mirror, running barefoot across the grass, laughing with that uninhibited joy only children still remember how to hold on to. I didn't know her favorite color anymore. I didn't know what size she wore, but I sewed anyway, because that's what love does. It reaches into the dark, hoping someone might still feel it on the other side. By the time I finished, the sun had dipped low. I sat back, staring at the dress laid out on the table, and a thought came so suddenly it almost took my breath away. What if I gave it to her? Not through Clara, not through Michael, but directly. What if I found a way to place it in her hands, not for approval, not for attention, but simply so she would know that her grandmother still thought of her, still loved her, still believed she deserved something made just for her. I didn't have their new address. Clara had moved last year, and I was never told. But I remembered the school Emma had started at. Clara had mentioned it briefly during a rushed call months ago, something about uniforms and early start times. I had written the name down on a scrap of paper, not knowing why I was keeping it. Now I knew. I found the paper in the drawer next to my sewing machine. I wrote a short note. No drama, no guilt, just a few lines. Dear Emma, I made this for you. I hope it fits. I hope you smile when you wear it. And I hope you know that someone out there loves you very, very much. Abuela. I folded the dress carefully, wrapped it in tissue paper, placed it in a small box, and addressed it to the school with a simple request. Please deliver to Emma M. 2nd grade. I didn't include a return address. I didn't expect a reply. It wasn't about that. It was about reclaiming my right to love her, even if only from a distance. The days that followed were quiet. I went back to my routines, my coffee in the morning, watering the plants, sitting by the window, watching the world move past. And then, 5 days later, something unexpected happened. There was a knock at the door. Not a loud one, just a soft, uncertain tap. I hesitated. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, no one was there. But on the doormat, a drawing. Crayons. Folded paper. My hands shook as I bent down to pick it up. It was a picture. Emma's handwriting at the bottom, unmistakable in its sweet, crooked letters. There was a house, a little girl with brown curls, a woman with silver hair holding hands with her, and above them, in a bright red heart, the words, I love you, Abuela. I sat down on the steps and cried. Right there, in front of the house that had once felt so empty. It wasn't just the drawing. It was the fact that she remembered me. That even after everything, after being cut out, rewritten, and erased, something had reached her. Maybe it was the note. Maybe it was the fabric. Maybe it was something deeper. Love has a way of leaving traces, even when it's denied a name. I held that drawing to my chest like it was a piece of treasure, and for the first time in months, I felt seen. Not by Clara, not yet, but by the one person who still had time to learn the truth, the one whose story hadn't been fully written yet, Emma. Maybe there was still a chance to be part of her story. Maybe not as often or as openly as I once dreamed, but maybe, just maybe, there was still a door cracked open. And for women like me, mothers, grandmothers, the silent givers, that crack is enough. Because we know how to build worlds through whispers. We know how to hold on even when our names are spoken less and less. We know how to pour everything into a stitch, a story, a single drawing left at a doorstep. If you've ever loved someone from a distance, if you've ever left something at the door hoping they'd feel it in their soul, please write in the comments, I loved them quietly but deeply. Your quiet love matters. And one day, it just might echo back. I kept that drawing on the fridge like it was a sacred thing, taped carefully in the center, surrounded by magnets from local shops and old family photos that hadn't been touched in years. But that one, the one with Emma's wobbly heart and crooked letters, it was the only one I looked at every single morning when I opened the fridge to grab the milk. It made even the coldest mornings feel warmer. It made the silence in my home feel less sharp. She remembered me, even if no one else did. Even if I was the missing face in the family portraits Clara posted online. Even if my name wasn't whispered in bedtime stories or written in birthday cards. Even if the neighbors didn't ask about me anymore. That one little girl, the only grandchild I may ever have, still carried a thread of me in her memory. That was enough to start breathing differently. Not fully, but differently. I didn't rush to send another gift. I didn't want to overwhelm her. I knew children are sensitive to tension adults pretend they don't see. and I didn't want her to be caught in the crossfire of emotions she didn't cause. I had no desire to be a source of confusion or guilt in her life, but I began to make space again, emotionally, physically. I started cleaning up the back room, the one I used to call the sewing room, though it had turned into more of a storage space over the years. I dusted the windowsills, organized the buttons, rethreaded the bobbins. I placed a little table in the corner, just big enough for 2 chairs. I told myself it was for tea, or for painting, or maybe just for talking, if ever one day Emma came again. I didn't tell Clara, and she didn't call. She still hadn't mentioned the drawing. I knew she must have known about it by now. Maybe Emma left it where someone noticed. Maybe Clara found the package from the school. Maybe she put the pieces together. But there was no phone call, no message, no acknowledgement. And still, I hoped, because something had changed, even if only on the surface of things. Even if only in the quiet corner of a child's mind where love lingers, even when it's not spoken aloud. A few weeks passed. I went about my days, one soft breath at a time. I walked to the market again, stopped and talked with Mrs. Hernandez, who always sold the freshest papayas. I smiled more, even if it hurt. I started humming while I worked again. Songs from when Clara was young, songs my mother used to sing when she was sewing beside me. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Clara. Her name lit up the screen like a ghost returning. I stared at it for too long. My hands froze. My heart pounded so loud I couldn't hear the thunder outside. I answered on the 4th ring. Hello? There was a pause. Not silence, but something more complicated. Hesitation. Then her voice. Hi, Ma. It had been months since I heard her call me that. Not Dolores, not hey, just Ma. And my heart cracked open in a way I hadn't expected. Not with joy, not with pain. Just raw, trembling humanity. I saw the drawing, she said. I waited. I didn't know what to say. She taped it to her closet, Clara continued. She said you gave her a dress, that you sent it to her school. I did, I whispered. I didn't want to cause trouble. She's been asking about you, she said, her voice getting quieter. She keeps calling you abuela again. The way she said it, abuela, it came out with a kind of softness I hadn't heard in years, like she was remembering too. I heard her breathing on the other end. I don't know how to explain it to her, Clara said. About everything. You don't have to explain, I told her. Just don't erase it. She was quiet again. Then, finally, Would you like to come over this Sunday? Emma's been asking if you can braid her hair. It was the smallest invitation, but it felt like someone had opened a door that had been nailed shut for years. I said yes. Of course I said yes. I didn't ask questions. I didn't ask who else would be there. I didn't ask if Michael agreed. I didn't even ask if this meant anything more than just one visit. Because I've learned, through all the pain and silence and years of being invisible, that sometimes the only way back into a person's life is one quiet act of love at a time. I spent the next 4 days preparing like it was a holiday. I cleaned the soles of my shoes, pressed my best blouse, baked sweet rolls that Clara used to love as a child, even though I didn't know if she'd eat them now, and I practiced braiding on a doll I'd found in the back of the sewing room. My fingers stiff with age, but still remembering the patterns. Over, under, smooth, tight, like weaving memory into hair. That Sunday, I stood outside Clara's house with the container of sweet rolls, the sleeves of my blouse rolled down neatly, and my heart thudding like I was 17 again. Emma opened the door. She didn't run. She didn't shout. She just looked at me, then smiled, and I swear in that moment the years fell away. Abuela, she said, stepping forward. And just like that, her arms were around my waist. Her hair smelled like lavender and honey. I knelt down, held her face in my hands, and whispered, "You remembered." She nodded. I never forgot. Not all children forget. Not all love is wasted. Not all stories stay erased. Some just need a page to be turned slowly. If you've ever waited for the smallest gesture to feel seen again, if you've ever stood at the edge of someone's heart and knocked gently, hoping for just one more chance, please share with me in the comments. Even love in silence is still love. Sometimes we need to say it out loud, even if they never did. Her little hand held mine as she led me into the house. It felt surreal. The warmth of her fingers, the light bounce in her step, the familiarity of this home that I had only seen in glimpses, from a distance, or in the background of photos I was never tagged in. The smell hit me first. Not the warm, spicy air of my own kitchen, but something cold and sterile. Scented candles, clean floors, furniture that looked untouched. But then Emma tugged at my hand, her curls bouncing, and suddenly the house didn't feel so unfamiliar anymore. At least, not to my heart. Clara stood at the end of the hallway, arms crossed, trying to look composed. But I saw it, the nervous flick of her fingers, the way she bit the inside of her cheek, the same way she did when she was 12 and got caught sneaking sweets from the fridge. And I saw something else, something I hadn't seen in a long time. Uncertainty, not power, not detachment, not the cold, polished perfection that had kept me away for so long, but something softer. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said. Her voice didn't carry the coldness it once did. It trembled, just a little, like she was afraid that any wrong word would push me back out the door. "I said I would," I replied, gently. "I always keep my word." She nodded, glancing down. Emma tugged at my sleeve. "Abuela, can I show you my room?" That word again. Abuela. It rolled from her lips like it had always belonged there. Not forced, not rehearsed. Just right. Clara stepped aside as Emma pulled me down the hallway. Her room was pink and purple, full of little drawings, books stacked on a tiny shelf, a teddy bear on her neatly made bed. And on the closet door, right where Clara said it was, the drawing. My house, my silver hair, her little smile. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Instead, I smiled and said, "It's even more beautiful in person." Emma giggled. "I made it just for you." We sat on the rug together. She pulled out a brush and hair ties. "Can you braid it now, Abuela? Like in the picture?" I nodded. She sat in front of me, and I parted her hair gently. My fingers remembered the motion. Years of practice, years of braiding Clara's hair before school, before church, before birthday parties. It came back like muscle memory, like love pressed into the hands through years of repetition. Each section I twisted felt like repairing something. Each tug of hair was like a thread sewing our story back together. Outside the door, I saw Clara walk past, slowly. She paused, just for a second, and I wondered what she saw. A stranger braiding her daughter's hair? Or her mother, trying to find her way back? I didn't ask. I didn't push. I stayed in the moment with Emma. After I finished braiding, I reached into my bag and took out a ribbon, sky blue with tiny yellow flowers. Emma gasped. "It matches the dress." I nodded. "I saved it for a special day." And she hugged me, tight, fierce, like only children can do when they mean it. "I missed you," she whispered. "I missed you more," I whispered back. We sat like that for a while, quiet, just existing in the stillness of reunion. Later, Clara called us for lunch. She had made a salad, some pasta, and garlic bread. It was simple, but I could tell she'd tried. She kept glancing at me while we ate, as if searching for something in my expression. Forgiveness? Approval? Maybe just understanding. Michael wasn't home. She didn't mention him, and I didn't ask. After lunch, Clara offered coffee, her voice softer now. We stood in the kitchen while Emma played in the living room. She poured 2 mugs and set them on the counter. "I didn't expect today to feel like this," she said quietly. I looked at her. "Like what?" She hesitated. "Like a beginning." The words hung in the air between us, and I realized something in that moment. For all the pain, all the distance, all the erasure, I wasn't the only one grieving. Clara had lost something too. The kind of loss you don't even know you're carrying until the absence becomes unbearable. She sipped her coffee, eyes down. I was angry for a long time. I don't even know why. Maybe because I wanted something from you that I didn't know how to ask for. I didn't interrupt. She needed to say it. "I think I confused survival with silence," she continued. "You never talked about your pain. You just kept going, and I didn't understand that. I thought maybe you didn't care, that you were just tough." I reached for her hand. "I was tough because I had to be, not because I didn't feel." She nodded, eyes brimming. I see that now. We sat in that kitchen, two women, mother and daughter, holding the fragile beginnings of something new. Not a fix, not a perfect resolution, but a thread. And sometimes, that's all love needs to start weaving again. When I left later that afternoon, Emma handed me another drawing. This one had 3 people, me, her, and Clara. We were all holding hands. The heart above us said, "My family." I hugged her, kissed her forehead. Clara walked me to the door. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You just did," I replied, touching her cheek lightly. As I walked down the steps, I didn't feel like a ghost anymore. I felt real, present, remembered. And even though I knew there would still be days of silence, of awkwardness, of rebuilding, this was something. This was enough to hold on to. And maybe next time, there'd be more. If you've ever fought for a space in your family's story, if you've ever been forgotten, rewritten, or made invisible, but still found your way back into their hearts, please, share your truth. Leave a comment. I am still part of this story. Sometimes, those 6 words are all it takes to remind someone else that they still belong too. The days after that Sunday moved differently. Not faster, not slower, just softer. I woke up with less heaviness in my chest. My coffee tasted warmer. The mornings didn't ache quite so loudly. The silence in my house, once so sharp it could cut, now felt like a blanket. Still there, still familiar, but less cruel. Emma called me on Tuesday. It was Clara's number, but it was her voice on the other end. High-pitched, excited. "Abuela," she said, breathless, "I wore the blue dress to school today." I closed my eyes and smiled. "Did you like how it felt?" "I loved it. It made me feel like a cloud." We laughed. She talked for a full 10 minutes. About her teacher, a girl who stole her pencil, the lunch they served that she didn't like, a joke someone told her that she didn't fully understand but laughed at anyway. Every word was a ribbon tying me closer to her again. And in the background, I could hear Clara's voice, soft, encouraging. "Tell her about your spelling test," she said. And just like that, a thread was stitching back between us. One phone call, one drawing, one dress. People think healing has to be loud, has to be dramatic, but it's not. Healing is quiet. It's the sound of a child's breath through the phone, the weight of silence being replaced by a giggle, the comfort of being remembered, not for what you gave, but for who you were when no one else was watching. By the weekend, Clara texted me again. "Emma wants to come stay with you, just for the afternoon. Would that be okay?" I had to reread it 3 times to be sure. Would that be okay? I almost laughed out loud. I wanted to write back, "I've been waiting for this since the day she was born," but I simply said, "Yes, of course." When Emma arrived, she had a backpack, a snack bag, and a little book for us to read together. Clara stayed in the car. She waved, a little unsure, but she let Emma walk up to my porch alone. I opened the door, and Emma threw her arms around me without a word. And in that moment, all the missing years, every silence, every forgotten invitation, every erased photograph, felt like background noise, because she was here now. We spent the afternoon making tamales. She rolled the dough with her tiny hands, and I taught her the same way I taught Clara all those years ago. Step by step, patience, gentle hands. A little too much chili, she complained, and I laughed. "You'll get used to it," I told her. "Did Mommy?" "Oh, yes. She used to cry every time." She giggled, proud of this little secret. Later, we sat on the couch, wrapped in the old crochet blanket I'd made when Clara was pregnant. Emma rested her head on my shoulder. She smelled like flour and cinnamon. "Abuela," she said, voice sleepy, "can I come next weekend too?" I kissed the top of her head, always. That night when Clara came to pick her up, something passed between us. Not a smile, not quite, but something more honest. A recognition. A mother seeing another mother. Later that week, Clara called me, not just to talk about Emma, but about herself. She asked about my past, about how I managed when I was her age, what it was like to raise her alone, why I didn't cry in front of her when we couldn't pay rent, why I never told her how scared I'd been most of the time. And for the first time, I told her. I told her the truth, that I didn't stay silent because I was strong. I stayed silent because I didn't think I was allowed to be weak. That back then, being a single immigrant mother meant you didn't have space for sadness. You couldn't break down. You couldn't ask for help. You just had to survive. And surviving left no room for softness. Her voice cracked. "I wish I'd known. I wish I had told you," I replied. That night, we talked for hours, not just as mother and daughter, but as women, as two people learning to forgive the versions of each other they had created in their heads. It didn't fix everything, but it started something honest, something human. One afternoon, a few weeks later, Clara came over alone. Emma was at a birthday party, and Michael was out of town. She brought me pastries from a little cafe near her job. She even remembered I liked mine with guava filling. We sat in the kitchen, sipping tea, and she reached into her bag and pulled out something that made my breath stop. It was a photo album. Not mine. Hers. She placed it on the table, opened it slowly, and turned it toward me. "Emma wanted to make a family book for school," she said. "So, I thought maybe you could help fill in the parts she doesn't know yet." My throat tightened. She handed me a pen. And just like that, she gave me back my place in the story. I started writing. Names, dates, little stories about Clara's first steps, the time she got lost at the market, the dress I made for her graduation, the lullabies I used to sing when she was too scared to sleep. Clara listened. She laughed. She cried. And for the first time, I felt like I was no longer holding all this history alone. We stayed at that table for hours, flipping through memories, piecing them together. Not just for Emma, but for us. Because sometimes the past has to be restitched, not erased, not rewritten, but gently sewn together again, with care, with honesty, with love. If you've ever rebuilt a bond after years of silence, if you've ever been given a second chance to be heard, to be remembered, please tell me in the comments. My voice matters. My story is part of us. You never know who needs to hear your truth. You never know who's waiting for permission to start again. That Sunday afternoon was quiet. Emma had gone home, and Clara's car had pulled away slowly, turning at the end of my street with the same caution one takes when crossing a bridge rebuilt after a storm. I stood at my front door, holding a half-empty mug of chamomile tea, letting the last golden light of the day spill across the porch. The air smelled like baked earth, like something old and healing. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a stranger in my own life. Inside, the sewing room wasn't just a memory museum anymore. It was becoming alive again. The second chair I had placed by the little table wasn't empty anymore. It was Emma's. I had started keeping extra juice boxes in the fridge, crayons in a small tin near the sewing machine, and a blanket folded neatly just for her. It was a kind of preparation I hadn't allowed myself in so long, because before the cake, before the drawing, before the soft return, I never knew if I'd be welcomed again. But now, I was. Not perfectly, not all at once, but enough. Enough to keep the door unlocked when I baked. Enough to look at old pictures without feeling erased. Enough to smile at the thought of next Sunday instead of bracing for silence. There's something sacred in that kind of peace. Not loud, not grand, just sacred. That night, I opened Clara's photo album again. I added another story. This one about my mother, Emma's great-grandmother, who used to sing to the corn when she harvested it. I wrote about how she believed songs made food taste better, and how I used to roll my eyes as a girl, but now, I understood. Maybe that's what healing really is, remembering with tenderness instead of ache, telling the stories that no one else knew just in case someone wants to listen one day. Later, I sat in my old armchair, the TV humming low in the background. The blue ribbon Emma had worn was draped across the armrest, and next to it, her latest drawing. This time, it was of our kitchen. Me standing by the stove, her at the table, Clara holding a cup of tea, and above us, in big purple letters, our family, not mine, not hers, ours. I pressed my hand to my chest and let the tears come. Soft, warm, not from pain this time, but from something deeper. Gratitude. Because this story could have ended at the cake. It could have ended at the silence. At the moment I stood in that backyard, watching strangers sing to a woman who wasn't me. But it didn't. It continued. Because I didn't give up. because a little girl remembered, because love stitched its way back, one fragile thread at a time. So if you're still watching this, if you stayed with me through every step of this journey, through every ache, every silence, every whispered hope, I want to thank you, deeply, from the part of my heart that still believes in second chances. And now I want to ask you something. If you've ever been forgotten and found your way back, if you've ever loved someone quietly and they finally heard you, if you've ever survived the silence and still chose to speak again, comment right now. My story didn't end there, because that small sentence might give someone else the courage to hold on a little longer. And if this story touched you, if it reminded you of your own mother or grandmother or maybe even yourself, please take a second to click the like button. It's a simple act, but it tells this platform that stories like ours matter, that voices like mine, like yours, deserve to be heard. And if you haven't yet, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Here, we tell stories that don't get told enough. Stories of pain, yes, but also of power, of survival, of love that refuses to be forgotten. Every new video is another thread in this fabric we're all weaving together. And before you go, don't miss the next video that's appearing right here on your screen. I promise it's just as real, just as raw, and just as filled with the truth we carry in silence. Click it now and keep walking with me through these stories that shape us, because sometimes all it takes is one voice to remind us that we're not alone. And today, that voice was mine. But tomorrow, it might be yours. Thank you for being here. Thank you for remembering with me. And above all, thank you for listening.